Okay, today we're going to take a look at the PC Engine Core Grafx 2. We're going to get straight into this. You need to remove these screws on the base of the unit. Quickly became obvious that this video was going to be about the Turbonanza installation, but my system actually didn't work. Unbeknown to me, the ribbon cable on the cartridge port to the motherboard had broken, so I was faced with a new problem and obviously had to fix this before I could get on to the Turbonanza installation. Those of you that were unfamiliar with the Turbonanza, it's basically a video upgrade for the PC Engine. I've already removed the output jack, the original output jack on that PC Engine before, because this was going to be, like you say, about the Turbonanza, but unfortunately this problem's got to be dealt with first. So didn't really know how to tackle this. I knew there was modification boards and ribbon cables that you could fit these, but this cable actually looked in reasonable condition, so I decided to give it a go and repair it as is. So I'm just trimming back, getting everything at the right sort of lengths, and then just tin these wires. That's what I've decided to do, is basically try and repair it first before I go to any other or order any other more parts. Like I said, there's a French company that does do a repairment board which converts it to a modern day ribbon cable, but you know, this didn't look too bad. Apparently it's quite a common issue that the ribbon cable eventually breaks off, especially if you've had the system apart. This system was already RGB modified, one that I'd done many years ago. It did work fine, and there is a video on my channel showing that I was using a HDMI conversion, but I didn't think the HDMI really did it justice, so I wanted to return it to RGB, and I did see the Turbonanza come up for sale, so I decided to give it a go and give that a road test and see how we got on with that modification. Once I'd tinned all the wires on the ribbon cable and stripped that already in prepared, I've obviously got to clear out all the holes on the motherboard. Now this turned out to be quite a challenge really, because all the fibres, all the the internal cores of the wire were all still inside the hole, so quite a challenge really. I've tried getting rid of the solder with a desoldering gun, but then I had to manually go into each pin and warm them up and remove the fibres that were left inside each of the little holes, the little vias, which was really time consuming and a complete pain in the arse, because even though you sometimes thought you got it all out, there was always a little bit of wire left. So it took quite a while to do this, so a little bit of cleaning up after I've done there, inspecting all the holes, make sure there's no bridged contacts. That's what I was worried about. These little slithers of wire that are in there could quite easily bridge a contact and corrupt the whole system. So once I'd done that, I pushed the ribbon cable through the motherboard, obviously allowing me to tack each corners on and make sure the wire was all pushed through. That went a lot better than I thought it would. I thought it was going to be a real pain in the arse. I was going to end up binning all of this and maybe going for these French guys' modification board. But I actually managed to get the wires through and tack the edges on. A little bit of flux there just to get everything soldered flowing nicely, because they are old wires, but they did tin up quite nicely. So again, so far everything's looking quite positive, so I proceed with obviously wiring in this ribbon cable into the motherboard, taking my time to make sure everything's soldered in nicely, there's no bridges and everything's looking all great. So everything so far, the project's going alright so far. I'm quite pleased to carry on. I did cut back the interference shield, which, as you can see, is soldered onto the board by there. I just cut that back very slightly because it was hanging around and it hadn't really stood the test of time, if that's the best way to put it. Chances are it was going to short something, so a quick trim of those wires and an inspection, and I can move on to the second ribbon cable. The second ribbon cable was a little bit more fiddly to install just because everything else is in the way, but it all went okay. Managed to get all the wires through, managed to get it all soldered on the other side, so fingers crossed that's going to be that repaired and we can finally move on to the Turbonanza installation. But a quick clean up and going over the connections. I did go over with a multimeter to make sure I'd got no bridged contacts or joints that had short circuited or anything like that. But the system seems to have survived. I was a bit worried that something had shorted out when it had broke. I didn't know it had actually broken internally. I think because the ribbon cable was under stress inside the case, eventually it just must have broke free, because it was a complete clean break. There was no few wires left on. I was quite surprised. Everything was a complete clean break. So I'm just making sure all those solder joints are nicely tinned and warmed up. and I've got a nice solid connection there, so that's really great. So again, now I can move on to the actual install finally. Well, this is the Turbonanza. This is the main board. Basically, it goes on to the expansion port at the back. This is the common place where most modifications, or where you pick up a lot of the signals from this system when I've done previous installations. So what I'm going to do is put a bit of flux on the connections. Now, the only things you are going to solder on this, if we get a bit of a close-up, the board has some white circles around specific connections, and basically they are the only connections you need to make. So a little bit of a tind here, get the first connection on, pull the board down, just make sure it's nice and tight to the main board. We don't want it wobbling around or anything. I changed my tip here just to give me a little bit more heat soak, and just gradually work your way. I think there's only like 5 or 6 connections that need to be made on each side. Plenty of flux, a nice bit of heat, and everything should go okay. A little bit of a bridge contact there. Very simple stuff. I think pretty much anybody could do this. So once it's installed, just going over the connections to give them a nice heat soak, make sure everything's nice and connected. And that's basically the motherboard installed, which again, very, very simple. On this modification, I'd already removed the port on the side. So what we're going to do is scrape away a little bit of the solder mask, because this is actually where the port is going to go. The original designers decided to basically put the board upside down. It doesn't solder on to where the original one goes. You just scrape some solder mask off, tin this area, and then solder the case of the DIN port onto the actual motherboard. Very, very simple, but I must admit it is effective and it is quite strong. I have tested it later on after this installations took place, and I was quite amazed how strong that bond is. Quite strong, if you know what I mean. So just line it up roughly, don't put too much on, because what you're going to do is basically close the case back up and look at the centralisation of that port in the actual case, and then you can move it around and get it where you actually need it. Once you've got it in position, the flex cable then needs to be added, which clicks into the as you can see, clicks into that little connection there. So there's nothing major there. A little bit fiddly because the ribbon cable's in the way. Once we've done that, there are 4 connections we need to make. So 4 wires need to be added to the back of the Turbonanza on those pads, and we need to be soldering them into these connections. So we have to move off these little resistors, which I'll show on the drawings. Once we've done that, I'm going to add this little bit of wire, just get this tinned and trimmed down very slightly. Then we're just going to solder it to the board. Very, very simple. Again, this is a really easy mod to do, and take my word for it, the results are worth it. I'm very, very pleased with the output. Every bit as good as the HDMI output, I must add. I think it is slightly better. It's slightly softer and looks much, much better than the actual HDMI conversion kit that I'd used. Just making sure that everything's nice and tidy. Then we're going to go over it with a multimeter just to make sure nothing's shorted out or cross joints or anything like that. This is always a worthy task, because the last thing you want to do is put it all together and it doesn't work, and you've got to take it all to bits and try and do the fault diagnosis afterwards. Just really tidying things up. I'm just putting some Captain tape just to hold everything down. There's no real reason for this, because the case protects it quite well. I just don't want to catch one of the wires and pull it off, so that's why I tend to put the Captain tape on, just to keep things secure while I'm actually carrying out the installation. So pretty much that's the Turbonanza installed. After this, I'm just going to do a little bit of tidying up, a bit of housekeeping. I don't like too much flux on the board, so I'm just going to go around with a bit of IPA just to give the board a little bit of a clean. This is worked out, this part of the mod anyway, is worked out very well, and such a simple mod to do. I don't see that anybody couldn't do this mod. It was unfortunate that obviously my ribbon cable had broke. Like I say, it is apparently a common issue. I've never experienced it myself. But there we go, that's the Turbonanza installed. Really pleased with the installation, it's gone really well. we'll get all this boxed up and we can have a look at it. Well, there she is, all ready to go. I'm just about to plug this into my capture device and my CRT, so I'm quite excited to see what sort of results I get from this. That's the port, obviously, that I've put in. Nice clean installation. That's what it looks on the CRT, so a little bit of outrun. Really pleased with that. I think that's come across really nice. I do like the colour reproduction, and the levels of noise are minimal. I'm really pleased with this installation. As you can see on the capture device, very clean, nice and smooth, very little noise, so I think it was a well worthy installation. I'm really pleased that it's brought this system back to life and done this modification at the same time. Really chuffed. I'll just try a few games just to get a feel, to make sure everything is all okay, and basically heat soak the actual machine to make sure I've got no further issues. It's always a good idea to allow the system to run for at least half an hour, just to let some heat get into the system and make sure you've not got any problems relating to heat or connections that fail in a certain amount of time. I've done installations in the past where when you've done the installation, the machine works actually really well. An hour later, or the next day, all of a sudden the system stopped working. I do love Bomberman. My go-to one is actually Saturn Bomberman. I actually prefer that the most, but this works quite well. I'm really pleased. Right, that's it. That's the Turbonanza installed. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next video. Bye for now.